morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. This is the coolest procurement conference I've ever been to. I've been to quite a few, so Matthias, please bring this to America. My name's Justin Dillon. Again, the company that I run is called FRDM, and we're a supply chain risk management platform, and I want to talk to you today about something. This is going to just buckle in, because this is going to be a little bit different, something you might have not seen before. We're going to talk about some things that haven't been talked about at this conference. In 1965, on the steps of the Montgomery, Alabama Capitol, Dr. Martin Luther King gave a speech in which he said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Now, this signature line became a line for King. It actually ended up being stitched into a rug in the Oval Office, and it's really just a metaphor for how people have used for generations to describe how movements work. He believed that the arc of the universe could be bent by people moving in the same direction. Movements are often started by activists, but they're finished by everyday people. And this is something that Martin Luther King not only continued to go on and do, but gave his life for. 189 years before that speech, a man named Adam Smith, an economist and philosopher known as the father of modern economics, published a book called Wealth of Nations, in which he described the marketplace as an invisible hand that is driven by the motivations of consumers and producers. He believed that when people act in their own self-interest, the world wins. Two ideas of the world: one focused on the interest of others, the other focused on the interest of self, both leading to the same conclusion. Both of these men were interested in human flourishing. When justice is protected, societies and businesses flourish. Human progress is not a zero-sum game. You don't have to sacrifice profit for progress. And I just want to be very, very clear and if you remember anything today, just remember this: cynicism is super uncool. Cynicism is just our way to control an uncontrollable world. The marketplace has played a role in changing the world and moving that arc over time. And it usually starts with consumers who are raising their voice and saying, we want the world to change in some way, and that voice is then picked up by the mass media of the day, whether it's the printing press or the telegram or television or the internet. That voice gets amplified, and then governments step in and go, oh, it sounds like the people are talking, we should probably do something. They do their bit, and then the market sets in and normalizes and operationalizes this chain. We've seen this movie over and over, whether it was the end of the triangle trade of guns, sugar, and people, or the end of the rubber trade from King Leopold's slave state in Africa, or even having to wear seatbelts in California, or the ending of secondhand smoke in restaurants and airplanes, or even the proliferation of electric vehicles. All of these were movements that were pushed over time, where citizens spoke up and the market ended up coming in, and that market played a role in pulling that arc a little bit closer to justice and human flourishing. I'm here today because I believe that all of us supply chain leaders are actually living in a movement today, and that's a movement towards supply chain transparency. I happen to believe it's a movement that Dr. King, Mr. Smith, and your CFOs could really get behind. The global crises that we face today require us to push our supply chains towards transparency. These include geopolitical risk. Much like you, I've been on my phone watching what's happening in Israel for the last few days. Before that, it was Ukraine. Before that, ... The world is moving away from free economies. Bloomberg predicts by 2050, only 33% of the world's economies will be free or almost free. I don't know what almost free means, according to Freedom House Index. Investors and boards are paying attention and pushing on supply chain leaders to be able to interrogate and understand where their supply chains are touching. We've talked a lot about sustainability here Most companies have sustainability goals, but most companies are missing the obvious wins because 80% of emissions are trapped in supply chains. We don't pay attention to that. Transparency helps us with that. And of course, we can't not talk about wealth disparity. We often think of that in terms of strikes or civil unrest, but we don't really think about the fact that there's 50 million people today operating in forced labor as slave laborers, working without pay, under duress, under threat of violence, economically exploited, and unable to walk away. They find their way, and their labor finds their way into goods that all of us use. Most of us have possessions and goods that we've brought here to this conference that somewhere in that supply chain exploitation has been used. These risks require a new business model, a new transparent supply chain business model, because as reported, not my stat, but someone else's, less than 6% of supply chain leaders have said that less than 6% of their supply chains have visibility beyond tier 1. Less than 6%. We need visibility at every stage. And this transparency movement has been building for years. I've been privileged to have a front row view of this transparency movement. In 2011, I got a call from Obama's State Department. I'm not going to tell you the backstory behind that. I'm sure everyone has. I got a call from Obama's State Department saying, we want to create something similar to carbon footprint, but we want to do it for slavery. And we want to call it slavery footprint, which sounded to me like the world's biggest bummer calculator. But of course I said, sounds great, I'm in. They wanted something to help consumers understand their connection to forced labor, connected to supply chains. And so we built an app that allows consumers to upload all the things that they own, from bed sheets to bicycles to bananas, and it gives them an accurate view of how many slaves it takes to run their life. The front page of the website says, do you want to know how many slaves run your life? Now, we didn't think a lot of people would want to know that answer, and the State Department said we need to get to 100,000 people for this to be real and to mean anything. 100,000 people to know their slavery footprint. And we ended up reaching about 35 million consumers who know their slavery footprint. These people uploaded everything from 100 million t-shirts. They uploaded about 9 million bicycles. I think, pretty sure those all came from Amsterdam. And about 3 million orders of shrimp. These are all things that, along with other items that consumers uploaded, they uploaded things that they use, and they started a transparency movement that started moving out. They started writing letters to companies and writing letters to lawmakers. Those lawmakers started showing up and trying to pass laws. There's congressional members and parliamentarians opening up speeches saying, I've got 42 slaves working for me and here's my bill. That moved President Obama to create an executive order that created a legal precedent, or removed a legal precedent, to allow the importation of slave-made goods into the US, which now has become the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. What we saw was the beginning of a supply chain transparency movement, and that very much caught my attention. So I decided to understand a little bit more about this movement and who this movement might affect. And so I went to the bottom of supply chains, and I met with young girls like Boobly. She picks the sparkles that go into makeup. And when I met her, her face was full of sparkles glued on by sweat, and it was not lost on me that those sparkles were going to show up on the faces of little girls in California one day. I met Vanak, a young father who was trying to take care of his family, went down to the docks for work and was thrown on a boat for 5 years, catching the prawns that ended up in my $23 kale salad in California. I met Ebenezer, who was bought for $20, forced to work all night. And when I asked his owner, why isn't he in school? He said to me, if he doesn't work, I don't eat. If that isn't an economics lesson for you, I don't know what is. This demand for transparency caught my attention and moved me to start talking to more chief procurement officers. I had the opportunity to go to conferences and speak, like SAP Ariba. We got some SAP Ariba folks here, probably everyone here. And at some point I was able to meet with CPOs and ask them, do you understand what's going on in the move in supply chains? Most had no idea. So in 2018, I decided to start my own company called Freedom. And the whole point of this was to be able to help companies use their procurement dollars to be able to drive transparency and actually shape and shift the way the world works. And we had some very early success. It was absolutely fantastic. But right around 2018, 2019, as I was building and grinding on this startup, things started happening in my personal life that created my own disruption. Everything I knew about the future for my family changed. We suffered incredible loss, including the loss of family members. And while I was trying to put on a good show, putting on this startup, inside I was absolutely broken. And so I went into therapy. And I'd never done that before. Highly recommend it. My therapist taught me 3 things that I'm going to share with you about supply chain disruption and dealing with these disruptions in the world. And it's a way of looking at the world through a 3-dimensional lens, meaning that we look 3D: disruption, daring, and discovery. First thing that my therapist taught me to do was to recognize that there is a disruption. Justin, your life is not going to be the same it is. You have to look at that and embrace that. I did not want to. And just like we as supply chain leaders need to be able to embrace the disruption that is upon us, globalization as we knew it does not exist anymore. Digital transformation, whatever buzzword you want to give, we have to embrace the fact that our supply chains will not be the same. Second, I had to dare. Dare to face fear in the face of courage. If you want something you've never had before, you must do something you've never done before. And this required me to be able to do things I'd never done before. And supply chain leaders today are being asked to do things they've never done before. Actually see your supply chains as not only a place to get value, but to promote values, all of which are listed on your websites. There is no greater place in your organization than to enact your values than your supply chains. But in order to do that, and in order for me to go forward, I had to do a system of discovery and look in myself and understand that what was will never be again, but I actually had to look at the problems from my past in order to get to my future. If we as supply chain leaders want to step into this movement, we need to do the same things. We need to understand our supply chains. How many times has this quote, "What gets measured gets managed"? Mapping our supply chains is now possible. It wasn't a few years ago, it is now. You can map all the way back. It is possible. It's not perfect, and don't let anyone tell you AI is going to fix it all. It'll help, but it's not going to do it all for you. This is something that all of us should and could do by mapping our supply chains. But here's the thing. Just looking at something and building plans doesn't fix it. You actually need to have a commitment to mitigate. There are suppliers in your supply chain that do not share your value. Their risks are your risks. So having the courage to be able to start to mitigate and work with those suppliers. And by the way, I was just talking to a company here before, and they were saying our plan is to work with suppliers that don't share our values. Amen. Go. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Not just remove, but remediate suppliers and bring them along in this journey. But one thing that you have to remember is that risk doesn't sit still for you to catch it. It's actually quite motivated. It's not really interested in your questionnaires or audits. It can get around that. There's no check boxes that risk is going to jump into. You have to constantly monitor your supply chain. This is something that if you step into this movement, the benefits are enormous. And the ways and what our supply chains will look like in 5 years is completely different if we step into this movement. And let me tell you that this movement is happening whether you want to be involved or not. You're either in it or you're watching it. But I want to be clear, and I want to double down on this point. This is not a zero-sum game. Your careers have never had an opportunity, and I'm talking about your careers, your stories, not your jobs, not your companies. Your career and who you are matters. There's never been an opportunity to protect people, planet, profits, and in doing so, find something that we all desperately want: purpose. One of the top 4 indicators of happiness is meaningful work. Work that contributes to a story greater than your own. Nothing can do that more than actually being able to use the enormous amount of spend that is represented in this room to transform our own supply chains and the way the world works. If you engage and step into this movement, you will leave something for future generations, and you will walk towards your end with a story that is much bigger than you could have ever imagined. I get the privilege every day of waking up and working with companies who are building transparent supply chains. They literally are the invisible hand that is bending the arc of the moral universe. And I'm so excited that this is a place that we can talk like this, and it doesn't just feel like it's going out and dropping. People here are very engaged, and this was an incredible opportunity. My name's Justin, would love to meet you, and we'd love for you to be a part of the movement. Thank you so much.